is Michael Padalano. Today I'm interviewing Matt Enos. He is a former combat engineer in the U.S. Army. He served in both Afghanistan and Iraq between 2009 and 2012. And today is December 4th, 2013. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So growing up, you grew up in Athens, Massachusetts. Massachusetts?
Athol, yeah, very small town in central Mass.
Cool. How would you describe like your family dynamic growing up?
Well, growing up, my mom and my biological father separated, never married. They separated when I was very young. So I grew up with my mother and a stepfather, who I love dearly. He raised me, but I did get to see my father about 2 weeks a year growing up. Pretty close, tight-knit family. Never had any major issues or anything like that. So I'd say upbringing was pretty good.
Cool. How did it like influence your worldview as an adult? Like, what would you say were the kind of cornerstones of your family values, if you will?
Definitely very loving, very accepting. It's made me a very open-minded person. So I never really have any biases or prejudices at all.
That's neat. Let's see. What would you say your family's political background is?
Not too sure. We never really talked about politics and stuff like that. It was usually a topic we not so much avoided, it just never really came up. But if I were to take a gander, I would say more on the liberal side than anything.
I want to go back. I just remembered you have two siblings.
I do, yeah.
Also, one served in the National Guard and one is serving currently, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Did you guys
grow up together?
Time? Yeah.
My sister's about 10 years older than me, so when I was young, she was already off to college after she had gone through her National Guard thing. But my brother, he's only about 5.5, 6 years older than me, so we were pretty close growing up. A lot closer now, actually, that we're older.
What was your involvement in the community growing up?
I wasn't all that involved. I was kind of a rebel, a little bit of a rebel, especially in my middle school, early high school years. Kind of a social deviant, I guess I would say. But once I got into high school, it's kind of when I felt like I started maturing up a little bit more. As for community, most of what I did was through a program called Best Buddies, actually, where we partnered up with kids in the special needs class, and like one-on-one buddies, we'd take them out and help teach them social skills and stuff like that. And I did that all 4 years of high school, and that was probably the most I was involved in the community.
That must have been really rewarding.
I absolutely loved it, actually. If I didn't join the military, I would have been working with that still today.
Oh, that's really cool. As like you mentioned that you were a little bit of a social deviant, I can relate to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But did that affect your educational career, or were you able to?
You know what? Actually, you mentioned that, and I think about it. But yeah, actually, in high school, I didn't really apply myself. I hated going to school. I hated doing homework, and I was like, you know what? When I get out of school, I want to take a break. So I actually took a couple years break before I joined the military.
Nice. I also took a year away. Were you thinking about the military all through this process of school, or did you kind of discover that in your time away?
I was thinking about the military ever since I was a child, honestly. It's kind of something I always thought I wanted to do. I just wasn't sure exactly how to approach it. And I talked to my brother about it, and he wasn't really for it because by the time I was talking to him, he had already been on 2 deployments, one being Afghanistan when it kicked off, and the other one being in Iraq. So he wasn't really for it, but I eventually convinced him, and he said, well, you can join as long as you don't go into the infantry.
So was he was a main factor then influencing your decision, or who?
One of them. He influenced me to not join the infantry, and it was actually a friend of mine. His name's Adam Spring. He's actually in special operations now. He had convinced me to become an engineer and to join active duty instead of the National Guard. And, he's a close friend of mine still today.
So let's see. Upon joining the military, what was it like adjusting? So you spent 2 years away from school.
Yeah.
Wait, what were you doing during those 2 years? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was working full time. I was doing a little bit of carpentry and a little bit of basic construction, but honestly, I was hating every minute of it.
Cool. So you're jumping from construction into
Straight into the Army.
how was that adjustment?
It was pretty abrupt, we'll say. I joined, it was January, and I was down in Missouri. It was very cold, and I just wasn't used to it. They shaved my head. They threw me in these very uncomfortable boots and uniform, and all of a sudden I was just having to adapt to a life I'd never really known. Now, fortunately, I talked to my brother and my sister before we had went, and they gave me a pretty good idea of what it was going to be like. So I was a little bit prepared, but for the most part, it was definitely a culture shock.
So you made a lot of like changes to kind of accommodate for this kind of changing.
Oh, absolutely.
Did the military do anything like? Did they change at all? Did they like do anything to accommodate you as far as your personal like?
In the beginning, no, they don't really do much to accommodate for you. Like, there's some things, but for the most part, it's like this is how it's got to be. You have to conform to this way, and then. I mean, it sounds bad, but there's a reasoning behind it. So they say, you have to adopt these military customs and values. You have to adopt this type of lifestyle, but there's a reason behind it. It's for cohesion, and so everyone's on the same page. And that's something I understood going into it, so it made it a lot easier for me. Some people didn't have that kind of insight and weren't able to adjust as easily, though.
I'm sure over time they probably figured it out there.
Some of them, and some of them ended up going home through basic training, didn't make it, stuff like that.
You mentioned basic training. How do you remember that experience?
It was the longest 3 months of my life, and I've been deployed a couple times, but I remember it was the first time I was ever that far away from home for that long, so I was pretty homesick, and of course they take away any form of communication, like getting your phone for a 5-minute phone call is a privilege you get once a week maybe. So it was definitely pretty wild, and looking back at it now, like I kind of laugh at myself for like how upset it made me, but I mean I got over it pretty quick though.
Did you feel pretty accomplished? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. Like I felt on top of the world when I got out. Like I was a whole new person, and in a good sense.
Did it so it made you feel more independent maybe, or like?
Yeah, absolutely. More independent or goal oriented. I just felt like stronger, like mentally stronger, physically stronger. Absolutely, I was in the best shape of my life.
Sweet. That's kind of a jump, all right?
Yeah, no, that's right.
So like how did you? So obviously you were given a lot of orders when you first came in, right? Because you kind of work your way up.
Yeah.
How was it difficult, kind of adjusting to always kind of taking those orders? Because I imagine there's pretty strong sense of discipline.
They break that of you pretty quickly, because if you don't obey, if you don't listen to orders and stuff, they physical punishment, like they make you do push-ups and make you run, and some of the stuff you're doing this until you're throwing up. So I learned very quickly not to question and just okay, take orders. I mean, obviously you always have your own little voice in your head that's going to tell you what's right or wrong, but most of the time, the Army's not as bad as people may think it is. It's not as bad as it used to be, where now your leaders and your NCOs, which are over you, they're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to take care of you. Now granted, basic training, they're a little hard on you, but that's just to get you into that mentality. So taking orders from people, I have no problem at all.
Talk about that little voice in your head. Did it ever contradict orders? Was that difficult?
Sometimes I think about a few things, but honestly, most of the time, I understood why they were telling me to do what they were telling me to do, and it made sense to me. So I never really had any qualms or any issues with anything that I was told to do.
So your biography says you served 2 tours, in Iraq in 2009 and 10, and then in Afghanistan in 2011 and 12. And,
Yeah.
these were route clearance deployments. You were a combat engineer.
Yeah, that's correct.
So you described your company encountering over 100 like IED events.
Mm-hmm.
That was in Afghanistan alone.
Yep.
To what extent did that influence just your worldview?
Well, this is where I guess it'll get a little heavy. This was my second deployment, and so I kind of knew what to expect going into this one. I was a little nervous because I'd just come off active duty, and there's a rivalry between active duty and the National Guard. When we were on active duty, we were like, oh yeah, the National Guard. So when I was in the Guard and getting ready to deploy with them, I'm like, oh crap, this is going to be pretty interesting. So we get out there, and the first 3 months were the most intense, I guess you could say, especially because, we're still getting used to working with each other. And so you're going out on missions 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week sometimes, and you're seeing this stuff happen every day, like just stuff's blowing up everywhere. And so, it immediately, for me, it numbed it. Like having it happen like that soon and that often, it just, after a couple of them, it just didn't really affect me anymore. Like, I'm like, all right, well, some may say, hey, you're crazy for that, but it's like, it's like almost like a defense mechanism. Or like, you just see things that happen so often that your body just kind of stops registering, I guess. So something would blow up and some people would be like all freaked out, like, yeah, I still jump, but I didn't get scared, I didn't get worried. Like the second time I got blown up, I was laughing about it like 30 seconds afterwards. Like some people call it might think it's a weird mentality or kind of sick or twisted, but honestly, it's a defense mechanism. It just keeps you from getting too amped up, too worked up, too nervous, too scared, or maybe just losing your mind, I suppose.
I imagine that brought you and the people around you pretty close together.
Some of the best friends I've ever had in my entire life, absolutely.
Do you think they had similar kind of coping mechanisms, or was there like kind of a broad range?
Honestly, everybody deals with it differently, and one of the most incredible things I found in the military is how close and how much people care for each other. From the outside, people, it seems like hard, we're yelling, we're angry. Honestly, a lot of us are big teddy bears, and we're not afraid to cry, we're not afraid to give each other hugs, pat each other on the back, take care of each other. So if anyone ever had problems, of course we pull them off missions, we give them time to rest and relax, and we talk to them. And like, there's so many different programs out there now, like even overseas they have people you can talk to. Even if there's no one on your base, you can Skype with them, or they'll send you out there. So if someone wasn't able to cope, or we're having problems with what we were doing, or we're getting scared, nervous, like we took care of them. We didn't ostracize them. We didn't like belittle them or anything. It was always in like a loving, like, we're gonna take care of you nature.
Interesting. So where were you stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan? Did they have like bases there?
Yeah. In Iraq, I came in, and of course you spend a short time in what we call like hub bases, like sometimes they're called COBs, or they have a whole bunch of different names for them. The Army loves their acronyms, but essentially what it is, it's a larger base, several different units and sometimes branches in different countries would be on there. That's more in Afghanistan than Iraq, but you come in, you spend a couple days, couple weeks there, usually like your main body of your units there. And then they kick you out to the different places where you're supposed to patrol. But in Iraq, I spent most of my time in the northern section, in the Kurdish territory. And there's a small place called Tuz, and our FOB is called FOB Bernstein, and it was named after an officer who was killed in combat while they were trying to establish the FOB a couple years prior to us going in there. And in Afghanistan, I was in the Kandahar province, right near the border of Kandahar and Helmand, at a FOB called, Sakari Karez. And it was, this is when in Afghanistan we started transitioning the names of our FOBs to the local areas in their language so they could understand, because we're taking these fobs and we're giving them over to the Afghan army. So it used to be Fob Ramrod, which I kind of wish they kept that name because I think that's hilarious. But they called it Sakari Karez, and it was in a town called Sakari Karez Kalay, and that was in Kandahar province.
You mentioned turning military stuff over to the Afghanistan
Mhm.
army. What was it? What was it like interacting with both the locals in Iraq and Afghanistan?
In Iraq, they were much more welcoming because we were in Kurdish territory, and honestly, I have some. My Iraq tour was a lot less, we'll say, hostile and aggressive than Afghanistan, but I hold on so dearly to it because it was something I felt we did very important, and we were in Kurdish area. And now, if you know a little bit of recent history for Iraq, the Kurds were the people that Saddam was literally performing genocide on. So what we would do is we'd be going out to give humanitarian aid. We go out there, we build them schools, we build them fresh water wells, we bring them school supplies, we bring them food. And it was very sad because we'd be driving up and you'd see these just bombed out rubbles of their old villages. 200 meters down the road, they got all these like little mud huts and stuff. You could tell that these villages, for Iraqi standards, used to be built up pretty decent, cinder block houses and stuff like that. And now they're literally making their houses out of the dirt that they're living in. And it was so sad to see. And that's why I just felt so, just a really good feeling to be able to go in and like take care of them. And some of these people that we visited, even that late in the war, 6, 7 years after we'd been in Iraq, we were the first Americans that some of these people had ever seen. So they were very welcoming of us, and they loved us. A lot of the Iraqi army in that area were Kurdish too, so we'd run joint missions with them because we were still training them and stuff. And they bring us food, just like plates and plates and plates of food, and they'd always be like, just wanted to talk to us, wanted to interact with us and give us chai and stuff like that. In Afghanistan, it was a little bit different. Historically, the Kandahar province is literally the birthplace of the Taliban. And so they had a pretty strong presence and a pretty strong influence there. So a lot of the locals, they didn't really want to talk to us. They didn't want to be around us because they knew if they interacted with us, bad things would happen to them. As for the Afghan army, as far as I know, a lot of them join the army and then they get sent to different places to kind of avoid. You see a lot of Afghan soldier opens fire on U.S. soldier because either they're extremists or Taliban infiltrates. So what they do is when the Afghan army would draft soldiers, they'd send them to different places, not from where they're from, just to kind of avoid that, I suppose. So a lot of them were pretty cool. They usually just come up and want to get stuff off us. They want cigarettes, they'd want energy drinks and stuff like that. But mostly, when it comes to interactions with people, Iraq was definitely where I saw a lot of amazing things, and I met a lot of amazing people.
I want to backtrack just to prior, before you got there and had this experience. Do you feel like you were prepared for what you were going into?
Not really, because honestly, after September 11th, and of course you get all that kind of propaganda that comes out that depicts these people as, granted, a lot of it is, it's a very old civilization, so a lot of them, a lot of people, we might see it and we want to use the word backwards, or we want to use the word traditional. At least I want to do that, but a lot of them sound very developed out there. So as Americans, in the public, they see this, and of course you get all these awful terms that would come out, I'm honestly, I'm not going to say them on camera, but you saw a lot of the derogatory things that came out after that. So that kind of gives this this imprints, this image of what these people are like, and then you get over there and it's absolutely different. And a lot of these people, some of the nicest people you could ever meet.
You mentioned 9/11, and you mentioned also always kind of looking at the military as an option, seeing all of like kind of America's reaction and that escalation of tension in the Middle East, did that affect at all the way you were thinking about the military?
It just made me want to go in even more. I was in 7th grade. I was in my world history class, actually, when the towers fell. Well, not when they fell, when they were struck. I remember coming back into the class, and my history teacher was sitting there, and he says, "Guys, I'm going to put on the TV. This is literally history in the making." And they put on the TV, and we saw the images, and it was, you know, obviously it was horrifying. It was awful things to see, but that burned this, like, just desire, like, you know, vengeance, you know, like anger, like I need to go do something. But I was in 7th grade. What could I do? And this is actually when my brother had joined the military, because he had literally, they had turned the TV on after the first tower was hit, and while he was watching TV, he saw the plane hit the second tower, and that changed him, and that's why he joined, and he was in Afghanistan in 2002 after that. So definitely seeing that solidified something inside of me that I need to go do something about this.
Tell me about a lot of the way you've spoken about your experience. It seems like it really, like, it shaped you, and like you met a lot of people who, like, clearly had a very strong impact on you, and some of them that you speak to till this day. So,
Absolutely.
Like, can you tell me about a few of them? Like,
Yeah, no. My first deployment, actually, I've been in several weddings since joining active duty with my active duty friends. 2 of my best friends, I was actually the best man in their weddings. I still regularly, he lives out in Washington State now. Once a year, I no matter what, once a year I go out there and see them for a week. I'm so close with his family that while we're still stationed in Kansas, that's where I was in active duty, I'd take leave. Instead of coming home, sometimes I'd go out to Washington and spend a week with his family, and he wasn't even there. Like, that's like, I just got that close. They're, you know, their brothers, their best friends, their family. And I saw that more so in active duty than National Guard, because active duty, you live with these guys. You're with them day in, day out, every day of the week. You are surrounded by them. So you just get this bond that I've never found anywhere else where I've had a bond like that. No fraternity. I think the only thing closest to, if not, this might surpass it, is probably firefighters, and that's probably the only thing that would ever be stronger than the bond between brothers in arms, I guess you could say.
it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
So coming back and now as a civilian, kind of watching how this is playing out in the Middle East, what do you see as the kind of best case scenario for Iraq and Afghanistan over the next 10 years?
This one's tough. What happened in Iraq after we pulled out is something that I think a lot of us predicted, because honestly, like, you can only do so much with language barriers to train their forces, and I'm not trying to, like, knock them down a peg or two, but they weren't very adequate, and they weren't, honestly, I don't think they were ready for us to leave. I'm not saying we shouldn't have left. I mean, I'm glad we had, and I'm glad we're gone now, because I got no more friends getting hurt. But I kind of predicted because right after we left Iraq, there was just almost riots and chaos, and honestly, I think the same thing's going to happen in Afghanistan when we leave as well, because I don't think I mean, if we're having trouble still with the Taliban, granted our hands are tied, the Afghan army, they're going to have a hard time as well. And I just think that it's too bad. You know, we've put a lot of stuff into it, but I feel like the same thing is going to happen in Afghanistan if we pull out as happened in Iraq, and Iraq's still having issues.
I mean, you talk about everything that we've put into it, and obviously it's a huge point of contention in the U.S. How do you feel about the anti-war movement, and what was your reaction coming back to it? Because I think vets kind of get a bad rep sometimes.
Oh, we absolutely do. My old armory used to be right outside of Northampton, Massachusetts, and if you know anything about that area, it's a very, very, very liberal area. And I couldn't tell you how many dirty looks I've gotten. I couldn't tell you how many times I've been called names, and I've been yelled, like, driving by and my window's down, and I just hear people yell shit at me out there. And it's kind of sad. I understand the anti-war movement, and I respect their side on it. Some things I do believe, though, are necessary. And trust me, there's a saying out there, it's a soldier above all who prays for peace. And granted, I would love for it to be over, just because, solely for my own selfish reasons of I'm sick of seeing young people get killed for certain things. But people have to understand that although, people are dying over there, and people, some people are confused as to why we're there, there's still really, really great things that are happening. There's a lot of things that we're doing over there that are really helping those people. And the thing is, it's their culture it's tough, because we're trying to change a culture. We're trying to westernize an Islamic nation. That's very hard to do. It's very difficult, because they hold on to their traditions very well, and it's understandable. They've been living like that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So, I mean, as for the anti-war movement, I understand why they want it to be done, and it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, like, they should also understand that we're doing some good things over there. We're taking care of things. We're giving people schools. We're giving women education. We're pushing to give women's rights and stuff like that. So the same people that are anti-war are the same people that are also for women's rights and stuff like that. So they have to understand that, yeah, there's always going to be a good with the bad. Like, there's just some things that you just have to fight for.
So you have that side of people being kind of cruel, but on the other side, I mean, I'm sure people have also articulated, how grateful they are for your service. Which way do you think it usually falls? Or do you feel
most of the time,
I'm
I'm 99% of the time. It's always, people hear about me serving or my friends serving, and it's followed by praise and thanks and just like genuine heartfelt appreciation, and that's that makes me feel great. And it's kind of like I don't know, I guess a little cherry on top of everything that the military's helped me out with. It's just kind of like makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like, okay, I did something. And I guess it doesn't exactly justify things, but it helps you cope and makes you feel like, okay, I've done some crazy things, I've seen some crazy things, I've tried to help people. Someone's appreciative, that means a lot.
Do you think the military has, coming back into civilian life, did the military provide you with any sort of support?
Oh, absolutely. A lot. Coming off active duty, they have a program called the Transition Assistance Program, where it's a workshop a couple days long, and they teach you how to write resumes and translate it back into regular civilian language, I guess you could say, because being in the military, all our acronyms, all these terms, people have no idea what that means. So they help you be able to just literally transition back into civilian life. And, they help you with getting jobs. There's so many different programs out there for veterans now. It's fantastic, as opposed to what it was 30, 40 years ago, especially when guys are coming back from Vietnam. You've seen Rambo. That's a little exaggerated, but they came back and were literally just all right, see you later. Like, good luck, adios. You know, barely any programs. You get the VA, and that's about it. Nowadays, there's so many nonprofits, there's so many different organizations that are out there to help vets. I wouldn't be going to college right now if it wasn't for some of the benefits that I've gotten in the military that weren't around, 30, 40 years ago.
That's great. So, religion, to some extent, I mean, is just the infighting. I mean, we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about the Kurds earlier. I mean,
Yeah,
infighting
absolutely.
between Sunni and Shiite Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
and just in general, kind of the, I guess, clash between both economic systems and religion seem to be kind of the point of contention. And I guess, what did you feel like you gained kind of seeing that other viewpoint, that other religion, and kind of geopolitical system?
My biggest thing I took out of that, I would say, is I have a very good understanding about how bad it is to be an extremist of any sense at all, whether it's religion, political, anything. Like, you can't be all one thing, because it's just stuff like that's not going to work. You can't be all of just one. You can't be an extremist Muslim. You can't be an extremist Christian. You can't be an extremist liberal. You can't be an extremist conservative, because you can't have all of one thing. It's just nothing's going to work if you're all one-sided. You have to have an open mind, and hopefully the world could understand that eventually. And that's my opinion. That's my biggest thing that I took out of that is as a world we're too close-minded.
Sorry, wait 1 second.
No,
Here,
that's
I
fine.
gotta scroll through these. Oh, yeah, you mentioned that you're kind of moving forward right now. You're striving to work in pharmaceutical research eventually.
Hopefully, that's one aspect. I just started the chemistry program here, and I'm going to concentrate in biochemistry. And pharmaceutical research is just one aspect of that. That's just kind of like right off the top, maybe I can do that. But there's still things I have to research, obviously. But yeah, I'm majoring in biochemistry. I'm going to minor in biology, and I'm going to see where that takes me. Keep my options open. But I absolutely love the field.
Cool. Did that interest, was that affected at all by your military service, or did that kind of?
That came after. That definitely came after. I actually I enrolled here to do criminal justice, and that was before. I was enrolled here before I deployed to Afghanistan, and I took a leave of absence for my deployment. So I came back, and I'm like, cool. I like carrying guns and stuff, but I don't want to go into law enforcement. Like, that's not going to be me. I don't want that to be my life. So I decided I want to help. I want to do things for people, and I tried to do nursing. And obviously, Salem State's nursing program is extremely difficult to get into, but that actually wasn't even all of the case. It was part of it. I'd actually started taking classes off the nursing flow sheet, and I did a couple chemistry classes, and I fell in love with it. It just came so naturally to me, and I decided that, okay, this is something I can see myself doing, and that's when I decided to make the transfer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It seems, I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Oh,
but it
that's
seems
fine.
like you were inspired. I mean, from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
service and the time you put in there. I guess at this point I've been asking you questions for a while now. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Off the top of my head, not necessarily. Just that the one thing I'd like to say is, and this is, I've heard a lot of veterans say, and a lot of people, like we've talked about earlier, don't agree with the war and don't agree with our motives and why our country has gone there. And to them I say, especially with my job, I find bombs, I pull them out of the road so people don't get killed. And my main motivation for deploying, and I want people to know this, my main motivation for deploying was to keep people alive, regardless of who they are, whether they're civilians, whether they're Afghan army, whether they're our own coalition and our own forces and the other countries that have come to Afghanistan to help us, NATO forces. That's why I deployed, not for anything else. I was motivated to go after 9/11 for revenge, I guess you could say, but getting over there and seeing all these things happen, I was there to take care of people. That's ultimately why I really wanted to be there.
Very cool, Matt. Thank you
Hey,
so
no problem.
much.
You're very welcome.
This has been personally extremely impactful, just having this conversation with you. And I mean, we have it recorded, which is awesome, so
Yeah.
that hopefully more people can see and hear your story. Thank you so much again.
All right, Mike, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
So again, I'm Mike Padalano, interviewing Matt Enos, former combat engineer in Iraq and Afghanistan.